This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Lessons Learned. And today we are gaining a lesson from somewhere in Europe. I believe you're in Ireland.
Dublin, Ireland. Yep.
Okay, so I did get that right. And with a name like Liz McGuire, that's the place where you should be. Um, at least that's what we assume. Um, and Lessons Learned is really a podcast about sharing our adventures, our
Mhm.
journey, so we can all learn from each other and make better choices. And as I was telling Liz before um, we went live, this past week has been a real adventure for me because many of our podcasters who were really into sharing their stories, being part of a bigger picture, now that it is a little over a year being in somewhat of a lockdown, um, they feel like now is the time to totally reinvent themselves. And, uh, you know, some people can do that and they can wake up the next morning and say, okay, I'm no longer going to be X, but I'm going to be A. And it works for them. But for the majority of us, we still have all that past that's coming with us.
Mm.
So, Liz, you are in Ireland, um, and we all know that you are American because we've heard a little bit of your voice so far. So, give our listeners a little bit of information, who you are, and how did you get to Ireland?
Sure. So, Karen, it's great to be back chatting with you this time on Lessons Learned. I so enjoy our conversations, and I hope that, who's ever listening today is enjoying it as well, because I think you and I we have a great back and forth. So it'll be fun to talk today about what you've sort of started the hour with. But I think to kind of get started, my name is Liz, and I have lived in Dublin since 2018. So I grew up in Pennsylvania and I lived in Washington, D.C. for 5 years before I came here for grad school. So I now work in digital marketing, and in my spare time, run an online archive of digital love letters, vintage love letters. So I archive letters from World War II, World War I, the 1920s, all that kind of fun stuff. And it's really kind of a place for me to go and just zen out. Like this morning, I had I had a bad night's sleep. I woke up, I was grumpy. And then for an hour before work, I was like, I'll just play with my letters. So I came in here and I had all my envelopes. I was taking pictures of stamps and I was making silly videos for Instagram. And afterwards I was in a great mood because I just sort of took this hour of time to just sort of indulge that fun side. And I think we'll have a great talk today about that, but there's a lot to be learned about how everyone has reacted to the last year and what we can do with that.
Well, and I sort of like rolled into the pandemic. So a week before it shut down here in Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
I had knee surgery,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew I had somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks that I basically was going to be housebound to a degree. Um, I was, prepared for it. So a week later, when we went into shutdown, it was like no big deal to me initially. I was still in my mind recovering from knee surgery.
Of course.
And then when 8 weeks turned around and was facing me, my doctor basically said, you are basically cured. It will probably take another year for your knee to feel normal,
Mm-hmm.
but go on and do what you would normally do. And I remember looking at him and saying, really? We're in lockdown here in Ohio. And he looked at me and he said, but a lot of your work is done online, Karen. There's no reason why you shouldn't be continuing. And I said, oh, I've been doing that for the last 8 weeks. That's no big deal. Um, but he was right. My life didn't really have to change much at all.
Yeah.
But I found the people that we were talking to, um, it was a huge change. They weren't getting up every day, driving to an office.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't sitting in a classroom other than online.
Mm-hmm.
And, you and your husband may have found the same thing. And I know with your digital marketing, you're online a lot. Um, and so for us, not a huge change, but then I talked to some of my friends who, especially worked in the outskirts of healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
and they couldn't help those people anymore because they couldn't visit them, they couldn't take things to them. All they could do was one on one online. So when you went into lockdown in
Mm-hmm.
Ireland, um, and knowing your family is all back here in the States,
Yeah.
how did that affect you?
Sure. So we are, fun fact, still in lockdown. They have announced that something like 25% of the Irish population have gotten their first injection of the vaccine. We When lockdown first started here, they being kind of the government and the powers that be, were very proactive about shutting everything down. It was work from home for everyone. Schools were closed, non-essential businesses were closed, and it sort of in contrast to what I was seeing happening in the States, it was very different. And in the States, every single state was trying to figure out, would masks be mandatory? Would they not? Would we open restaurants for outdoor, like all of the different state by state differences. Whereas when you live on an island, like I do here, it was very easy for them to say, restaurants are closed, movie theaters are closed, these shops are closed because of the size. But that only works when they open again. So Ireland's a very social country, big on family, big on friends. It comes a lot from the kind of dining and, pub culture of meeting up with people. And so there was a lapse in judgment, I think, in December, where the powers that be made a decision to open everything up again with the understanding that they would put us back into this sort of situation in January. So for about 3 weeks, life was, you could go get a sandwich. You were supposed to be masked, but you could meet up with people if you were 6 feet in a restaurant. It was very like back to normal. And then December 27th, they said, pull the plug, everything goes back to the way it was. And when Karen and I are recording this, it is almost May. And the kind of bullet point version of this is that all of our wet pubs have been closed for over 400 days. So a facility which serves drink exclusively and doesn't have any sort of food component, they haven't seen business in over 400 days.
Wow.
Restaurants which serve both food and drink are able to have takeaway or not even click and collect. They have to do delivery. All of our non-essential retail is closed. So essential retail means you have foodstuffs or things like that. They just there was a big media thing here where you couldn't buy shoes. So kids were actually growing out of their shoes and couldn't have shoes.
Wow.
Because they haven't opened our stores in 4 months. So every time I talk to my parents at home, my old joke used to be, I can't buy socks because we literally can't in our stores. It's deemed a non-essential item. But my new thing is that I need a new shower curtain. So I can't buy a shower curtain, but hopefully in May.
Wow. So, I just learned something because I didn't know about this. And that's more restrictive than any of our states have had, at least that I'm aware of. Um, we always had takeout of some sort, even in our lockdown. And it it has been fairly safe along those lines. Now, I will say, when Ohio decided to open up restaurants, um, a lot of them did adhere to the standards they needed to.
Yeah.
But there still were a number of bad apples in the bunch.
Mm-hmm.
Decided that, hey, you're not going to police me, so I'm not going to put up barriers. I'm not going to take out seats. I'm not going to count people coming in. And then we had a spike again.
Yeah.
And it's been up and down. I'm now, I have my vaccines. Everybody,
Congratulations.
yes, we are very lucky. Um, but that still doesn't stop me from wearing a mask,
Mm-hmm.
being careful who I'm going out with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, an example of that is I have a very dear friend who's one of our podcasters. And right in the beginning, she kept saying to me, we can get together because we know each other. And I kept saying, no, we can't, because you go in different areas that I do not go to.
Yeah.
And um, I'm just going to restrict that. So we're going to continue doing Zoom. And if
Mm-hmm.
we just want to have a conversation, we can have a conversation on Zoom, FaceTime, Skype, doesn't make any difference. But I'm not ready to have you even in my house with the mask on.
Yeah.
And yet, yesterday, we were talking about something else, and she said, and if you're ready to get together, and I said, next week will be 2 weeks since your last vaccination.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I will,
Mm-hmm.
but we are going to wear masks and
Yeah.
we're going to use our hand sanitizers. And she said, well, absolutely. And I said, so those are my conditions of being around other people.
Yeah.
Um, but what we learned in this past year, I'm surprised it took us so long to learn this,
Mm.
right? Because we had a huge pandemic in 1917, 1918.
Mm-hmm.
And you may have come across letters uh, regarding the Spanish flu and uh,
Mm-hmm.
how it took so many lives down, but we didn't have the internet. So
Mm.
we didn't know on a daily basis
Yeah.
what was happening. Um, and in fact, it took me until probably 3 months into this to realize that my father had been subject to the Spanish flu.
Okay.
They thought he was going to die as an infant.
Okay.
Obviously, he survived to become my father, but it did cause long term results to his heart.
Yeah.
And so we still don't know how people are going to be long term. So obviously, right now, you can't even come home to visit family,
No.
and family can't come to visit you either. Is that correct?
2 weeks ago, Ireland announced that they were going to do mandatory 2-week hotel quarantines, which is what they should have done in March of 2020, not March of 2021, which was fun, especially because both of my parents are now vaccinated. So there was this kind of expectation that they would be able to come in the summer and do the sort of, get a rapid test done. And because you're very good about wearing masks and continuing to do so after getting the vaccine, because of the fact that someone who has had the vaccine can still carry the virus. So we had a whole plan in place that they would sort of get here, get a rapid swab, and then that would kind of be the golden ticket to be able to see people, because they would be able to say, I'm vaccinated and I have this, where Ireland's doing a really slow rollout of the vaccine. So a majority, like I said, 25%, so 75% haven't even had their first consultation or their, phone call about when they'll get theirs. So yeah, it'll be 2 years since I was in the US in October. And it'll be 2 years since I saw my mom in November, and 2 years next January for my dad.
So it's got to be difficult.
It was very hard at first, in the last sort of the first wave of things, because I really struggled with what the idea of essential was. The US was put when we being Ireland were quarantining, and it was the first 3 or 4 months, and we had a real team spirit about this. And the States was trying to figure out what they were doing. The States were put on the red list, or they were said to be put on the red list for non-travel. So they were deemed non-essential. And that was the hardest thing for me to accept, was that there was a nameless, faceless entity deeming what was essential in my life. Because I was sort of like, who let you out? You can take my socks, you can take my shower curtains, you can take my movie dates and my dumplings and all that. You can take that. But saying that, a family visit is non-essential was the biggest thing for me to kind of get my head around. And fortunately, that hasn't been the same scale of kind of intense to wrap your mind around. But it is still, you know, you have peaks and valleys. And we're hoping that in May, things will start to open up a little bit more. But yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is. So tell our listeners what
Mhm.
got you into collecting these letters.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's amazing because we know there are a lot of letters probably sitting in post offices somewhere that are from 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
So, what brought you to this idea of your podcast?
Yeah. So collecting vintage letters is really not a usual hobby. I have found other people who collect, they're called like found photographs or orphaned photographs. And, you know, I've found similar interest there, but letters are a really personal thing. So to collect them, you have to come from it of a standpoint that they are a personal object. Whereas with a photograph, you know, you don't have a name, you might not have anything. It's just sort of an art piece in its
Right.
abstract form. But when you're collecting photographs or postcards, you not only have a name in most cases, you have an address, you have a date that they lived at that address, you have the names of friends and family. There's a very real, there's a contextuality there. So I started collecting letters when I was in high school, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with them. I just sort of had this inclination to pick them up at flea markets. And when I was living in Washington, D.C., the apartment that we were in had been renovated before we moved in because there had been a fire. And I remember I was sitting one weekend and I was kind of looking at my bookshelf with my tchotchkes and stuff on it. And I thought, you know, it would be such a shame if this, you know, went up, because I was thinking about the history of the apartment. And I was like, you know, if I was the only person who had ever seen these World War II letters, that would be devastating to me, because like they've never been mine. I've always been in charge of them, but they've never been mine. So I was sort of like, you know, well, I'll just take photos of them. So I took a bunch of pictures of them. And then I was like, well, they're really hard to read that way. So I'll just type them. So then I started typing them. And then I thought, you know, this was 4 years ago. I was like, everyone's on Instagram. I'll put them on Instagram. And I had my mom and like two friends who followed it on Instagram. And I had, now that I'm in marketing, I understand there's like a whole strategy to apply. But when I started doing it, I was just so excited that I would post like 15 pictures of envelopes in a row, because I wanted everyone to be as excited about this
Sure.
letter project. And it's been 4 years since then, and it's had an incredible kind of evolution, and it changes every day into what it's going to be. But what the purpose of it is a community driven project to preserve letter stories. So what that looks like is collecting vintage letters, photographing them, transcribing them, putting them on my website, and sharing them on social media, all with the idea that it's done respectfully and with the full sort of absent consent. But if someone got in touch and said, take my letters off your website or take my Grammy's letters off your website, they would be done. There's no ownership of anything. It's just basically a curated archive.
And, you know, I love that you've done this. Uh, Downstairs in my closet,
Mm-hmm.
I have four huge Tupperware containers. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, I have binders of letters and poetry my
Mm-hmm.
father and his father
Mm-hmm.
written.
You're
Uh,
giving me goosebumps, Karen.
yeah.
You're giving me goosebumps.
um, and you know, I remember some of them when they've been read. You know, my father and both my grandfather, for everybody's birthday, they got a poem. Okay. Um, and sometimes it would say the lyrics go to, you know, this music, you know, because that's what they heard in their head. And as a young kid, I used to love getting my, you know, birthday and holiday poems from my grandfather and my father. Um, didn't know that my father was keeping a copy somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And uh, was so grateful when my mother passed away to
Mm-hmm.
find these binders. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I inherited all my mother's photos too,
Yeah.
which you're right. You know, a photo has history to it, But if you don't know who all the players are in the photo, it's like, it's nice. I know this was probably taken in the early 1900s based
Mhm.
on the formula of the picture, but I know nothing about it.
Yeah.
But yet, when I read my father's words, my grandfather's words, it's like, so that's how you were feeling in 1950. Ah, this is how you felt when you first met my mother in the early 40s.
Yeah.
And it changes, as far as I'm concerned, the journey that we now are taking, because
Mhm.
we learn something from each of those letters.
Deeply. Yeah, very much so. I could ask this, my letter brain is like 150 questions. But I think what that makes me kind of understand or be interested in is just, you know, the idea that your parents were people before they became parents.
Exactly, exactly.
And it gives you kind of, because of the letters that I collect, you know, a lot of people would comment or write in and be like, oh, does he marry her? Do they get married? Like all this sort of stuff. And that's a very different thing. That's genealogy. That's not what I do. But I have done the sort of cursory, you know, who does Bob end up marrying? Oh, some woman named Denise. Okay, that's not who he's writing in 1944, but that's fine. We'll like, so I just think it's so wonderful because, you know, however these letters come to people, whether they're family letters or they're found letters, they really are encapsulations of people at a moment in time. It's very special.
Absolutely. Another thing that we came across, and this, my husband was on one of those heritage
Mm-hmm.
websites, and it came through and it showed um, his great grandmother on his maternal side, who her family came from Germany, but his her husband's family came from Ireland.
Okay.
And as we're reading through that, we sort of knew that was the case, but here it was documented. Okay.
Yeah.
And we could see that. But the interesting part really became one of, as we're reading through it, on the German side, his, I think it's his great grandmother, she was actually a doctor in Germany, and she married a Jewish man,
Okay.
brought her to the United States before World War One.
Wow. Okay. So it was it an interfaith marriage?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's how we look as you go back and look. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he was from Ireland, she was from Germany. Doesn't say how their paths crossed. She
Yeah.
became, and for a Jewish woman at that time in life to actually get a medical degree.
Yeah. To become a doctor. That's very impressive.
Absolutely. And here my husband and I are in an interfaith marriage, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm Jewish. And he looks at me and he goes, so I guess we got attracted because there's some Jewish blood in me. And I said, maybe, I don't know. But it took a whole different look at what our ancestors went through
Yeah.
to come to the United States. And I found that in some of your letters. We may not know all the bits and pieces, but
Yeah.
when you read them, it's like they went through a lot, or boy, they were helping other people. Um,
Yeah.
and it encourages us to do better.
It does. It really does. There's so many things again. I just one thing I want to make sure I tell you before I forget it. There's actually a very interesting history of Jews in Ireland. My partner is Jewish, and he moved here with me with kind of just a luck and a prayer. And when he got here, you know, we found little things everywhere that he was sort of like, "That's we read about. That's from Temple." And I would be like, that's weird. Like, I don't know why that's on that building or whatever it would be. And then he would come home and he'd Google it and he'd be like, that's because that was like, you know, a Jewish club in the 1930s. And he's like, I didn't know this. You're in Dublin, Ireland. And one of the Lord mayors of our town, famously of our city, was famously Jewish. And when we went to a menorah lighting in 2019, and they did, donuts and soda in the sort of big fancy room after the menorah lighting. And Sam was all excited because he was like, this is we would have like sugary donuts. And he was and he was telling me all about this. And then there's they have sort of the family crests or the plaques of the Lord Mayors on the wall. And there's a Star of David, and he's all excited. And he's like, it's fascinating kind of to hear about Irish Jewish connections that far back, because they're there. They're just never, they're not mainstream. So I always get excited when I hear about them because I'm like, oh.
Well, it is funny that you should say that, because I remember growing up on St. Patrick's Day, I always wanted to wear green. Okay. And as far as I know, on my side of the family, there are no Irish people, but whatever. And I probably was 9 or 10 at the time. And I tried telling my classmates that I was part Irish. And it went on for a couple of years. I just had to convince myself I was.
You were, yeah.
And, my maiden name is Moss. It doesn't nowhere sound Irish. My ancestors basically all came from Germany. And I'm sorry, from Russia. And so I remember my mother bringing this up probably when I was in my 40s. And she said, do you remember when you went through that phase that you had to be Irish? And I said, well, yeah, because everybody wanted to know why I was wearing green.
Yeah.
And I said, I felt I had to wear green. And she said, so you convinced yourself you had Irish blood? And I said, I guess. I said, but Mom, I was 9 or 10 years old. I mean, can we just put that in the background? And she said, no, I'm just curious. And she brought it up numerous times over the years. And especially St. Patrick's Day would come, and she'd call me up and she'd say, so I guess you're wearing green today?
And Karen, it's your holiday.
I was like, I'm out of that phase. I like the color green outdoors. I don't like it on me. So it's interesting how we can latch onto things that are important to us. But back in those days, I remember, and I think it was my Sunday school teacher who said to me, the only Jews in Ireland are those that migrated to get out of Russia and Poland.
It was a big population, yeah.
And I said, oh, no, that can't be, because, I'm Irish.
Jews are everywhere, Karen.
Right. But then I did some studying, and I realized that she was absolutely right, because Ireland was a Catholic state for the most part.
They were refugees. Yeah. They came here as refugees. Yep. It's just my dad grew up here and lived here, and he went back and forth to the States a number of times in his 20s before he moved there sort of permanently now. And he used to tell me a story about Ireland and Dublin in the 70s, that when he lived in the States for a summer, he got really into bagels. And he came back to Ireland, and obviously this was very still kind of village-esque Ireland, Dublin even. And he found one Jewish bakery that is now like a big chain of bakeries. But he has this memory of it being like beside a footpath in this town outside of Dublin. And he would always be like, Bretzel's Bakery, they had real bagels. And because even then, the Jewish community in Dublin was so small that, he was an outsider going into this bakery, because he came from like the New York, Philly side of things, where he was like, okay. I want a bagel.
Exactly.
And God bless the people at Bretzel's, they looked at him and they were like, this tall, skinny Irish kid needs Jewish food, and we'll give it to him.
And now bagels are everywhere.
But
everybody makes them. Yeah.
You still can't top a good East Coast deli bagel. You just
can't. I can't disagree with you there. So before we started today's show, you mentioned that there is a time difference as we're recording, because you're in Ireland and I'm here, that you were actually working at your day job.
Working away.
And this is the first time I think I've realized that you are doing digital marketing in the jewelry area. What woman doesn't love jewelry? Okay. I don't even, the sad part is I don't wear my wedding rings
Okay.
um, because I'm not going anywhere. And I don't know, sitting around the house, I just have them off. So I just have my
Yeah.
wedding band on. But tell us about the jewelry that you are marketing for. I mean, it sounds interesting.
So you have a natural talent because the jewelry company is called My Irish Jeweler. And we actually were founded when a Dublin based jeweler named Peter Gavin had a brick and mortar store in town. And it was about 15, 20 years ago, he wanted to move more into e commerce. So he met up with Kieran Vipond, who's the co owner of the company, and Kieran had a background in e-commerce and Peter had a background in jewelry. So the two of them got together and built the company as it is today. So there's a team of us who kind of run the shop behind the scenes. But, you know, I said you have a natural talent for it because when I started working at the company, I mentioned, you know, that Sam was Jewish and I was trying to explain, you know, Irish Catholic girl brings Jewish American boyfriend to Ireland. Hi, I'm new in your office. And it was just kind of mentioned, it was like, well, you know, Peter's Jewish. And I would be like, oh, okay. And then at the Christmas party, we were all having dinner. This was 2 years ago now when you could have dinner with people. We were sitting around at a table and I said something and I made some, I forget, I used some Yiddish as a joke to like kind of be like, oh, hey, boss, like, haha. And he looked at me and he just waited a pause and then he went, you know the words. And I was like, I'll get you. I'll get you. I was like, I can do this.
Yeah.
And when we walked away from the table, there was a different level there because I was just sort of like, hey, huh? Shabbat? He was like, you know what Shabbat is? I was like, I do. And so everyone else at the table was like, what's going on? So yeah, it's a great company. We have a great little ecosystem going, but it is fun because there's so many different sort of backgrounds and things that come into it that you don't know until you get talking, but there's something that connects everybody.
You know, and that's part of the lessons that we all need to learn.
Mm,
Um, I don't know if you're having any unrest in Ireland like we have
mhm,
having here in the United States. Um, in fact, I remember right after George Floyd, I was
mhm.
talking to a friend of mine who happens to be Black, and I made the comment that I just don't understand why people care what your color of your skin is, or
Mhm.
what your religion is, or the traditions that you want to uphold in your private space.
If it doesn't bother, if it isn't part of my bubble, why do I care?
Yeah, exactly. And but yet she got a little bit frustrated with me and she said, I want you to see color. I want
Okay.
you to see the difference in religions. I want you to see the difference, you know, how maybe somebody growing up in Ireland is
Mm,
possibly different than somebody growing up in Cleveland, Ohio.
mhm,
And I said, well, yeah, I understand that, but it doesn't bother me. Okay.
mm,
It's not bursting my bubble.
mm,
It's it's part of my bubble because I'm accepting. And she said, well, I need you to listen better because it's not just about accepting,
mhm,
because you are privileged. And I
mm.
looked at her and I said, no, 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 no. I said, I had to work for my education. And I started just this litany of
Mhm.
information. And she goes, that's not what I mean. She said, can you walk down the street without being afraid?
Yeah.
Can you get stopped by the police without being afraid? And the reality of it is, I still say no. I am
Mm,
afraid, but I now understand the difference.
yeah.
It's less of a chance it's going to happen to me, to anything bad, than it is someone with darker skin than myself.
Yeah.
And I also know that at one time in my young life, um, my parents never told me not to tell people that I was Jewish, but they
Okay.
told me not to offer it.
Oh, how interesting.
And I didn't understand it till I got older, and I realized that there were people who um, resented anybody who was Jewish, or
Mhm.
they assumed if you were Jewish, you were, you were a conniver and you had money and
Mm.
you're at the top of the rung.
Stereotypes, yeah.
And it was like, well, that's not my family, but I,
Well,
w-
see,
I wish it were.
this is why I think that the Irish and uh, the Jewish community get along, because both are fiercely stereotyped. And there are a lot of similarities, you know, in how we'll talk about grandmothers. There's a lot of similarities in how my grandmother, my Irish grandmother, and Sam's bubby would be very similar. Like my granny would do something that Sam's grandmother died years ago, but he would be like, oh, Bub would have said something like that, or Bub would have done that. And I'm always like, isn't it, we always stop and look at that moment and go, you know, my grandmother was born in a cottage 80 plus years ago in the west of Ireland that had, you know, no lights and no running water, all this kind of stuff. And, you know, his grandmother grew up in New York and lived in Long Island and had this totally different life. And they were different worlds. But he'll look at the two of them and go, Bub would have done that. And so I think there's really an affinity between the two groups because of that, you know, outsider insider stereotyping that really links us in a nice way. You can still kind of take it too far with either side, I think. But when you can kind of see a similarity like that in grandmothers, you can be like, oh, okay, I understand what we're working with here.
Well, and I think we have more similarities across the board with everyone than we do differences. Okay.
Absolutely.
But we look at, like you said, the stereotype. So one of our shows that we do here is called The Rant, and it's about ageism. And we look at people and we determine you're way too young, you're way too old. Well, you're sort of in the middle. And it's like, what am I too young for?
Yeah.
What am I too old for? And I think this past couple weeks, we learned that you're never too young to know right from wrong. This beautiful 9-year-old Black girl saw something happening a year ago and she pulled out her phone and she recorded it. Now, that shows me that it's exactly what I would have done if I was there. And you're never too young to know what is right and what is wrong. And so I'm hoping with lessons learned, with the stories that you tell about the letters that you're finding, that we can continue to find more similarities in our lives and, you know, put out our hand and reach for the next person. And right now, maybe it has to be a fist bump, and that's okay. Or put on rubber gloves, you know, and shake and then change your gloves. But whatever we have to do, it's time to, you know, do it together.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's what you're doing in all walks of your life.
Oh, I love letters. I think everybody has a letter story. And I think that letters are just the best because you can talk to anybody in the corner of the world and they have a grandmother's letters, they have letters they found at a garage sale, they have something they bought a dresser from a charity store and there was a letter in a drawer, and everybody has something to do with letters. And the best part about them is about letters is that, you know, people always say to me like, oh, I wish I had more time to write letters. Like I would love if I could write letters again or ever. And the kind of gem about it is that you do have the time. You're just spending it elsewhere. You're spending it in totally satisfying ways that, you know, are enriching your life. But I ask people to never look at it like, oh, I wish I had the time to do that, because you can make the time for it and you can find places to fit things in. But if you're not doing it, then maybe you're fine, or maybe there is something that can change. It's all personal, but letters are the best.
Well, along those lines, I made the decision about a month ago that I knew exactly what I wanted for Mother's Day. So I put the hint out to my sons and I said, I want a sketch pad and charcoal pencils.
Okay.
And they both sort of said to me, really?
You're a cheap date, Karen.
But it was like, what are you going to do with it? And I said, I've always wanted to really attempt to draw.
Okay.
But I was always told by my art teachers and even my parents, um, maybe you want to put your talent someplace else. Um, but I never really put my energy into it.
Okay.
But it's something that I've always wanted to do. And I thought, I can try. Worst case scenario, I burn the sketch pad and I donate the charcoal pencils to somebody else. But I can tell my stories through a podcast, through my blogs, and through drawing.
Yeah.
So it's never too late. And like you said, we can always find the time if it's something we want to do. Um, I think we have been living in a world that if we don't say we're busy, people think we're lazy.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly saying we're busy, and then we make ourselves busy.
Mm.
And I find that even around the house, working out of the house, similar to the way you are doing, um, it's like, if I have a break right now, oh, I better go do laundry. Oh, I have a break right now. Let me go start dinner. I have a break right now. I better go to the grocery store. I keep thinking, I have
What can I slot in? Yeah.
right. And then at the end of the day, I'm saying to my husband, I am thoroughly exhausted.
Yeah.
He goes, well, you only had 2 shows today. Yeah, but I prepped for them. I did them. I
Yeah.
wrote about them. I posted them. Oh, and in between, do you know that your laundry got done? Oh, do you know that the floor got vacuumed? And he looks at me and he'll go, but you don't have to do it all.
Yeah.
But we've convinced ourselves we have to, because when we go to bed at night, everything needs to be done.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very valid point. And I would say, kind of to build on it, their flea market recently got a lot of press for no reason. Basically, I filed a form with the Guardian, and then the Guardian published my face, and then Sky News called, and it was a very weird 2 weeks. Where I was basically like, I would just be sitting at work and my manager would say, like, can we do a call at 3:30? And I'd be like, can we do 4:15? Because I have to talk to BBC. And he'd be like, okay. And so it was like a super weird 2 weeks. But you're making me think there, because I know I would do a lot of the laundry, and I do all the laundry in our house. And the morning after I was on the news, Sam was getting ready for work and he put on dress socks. And I looked at him, I was like, what are you wearing dress socks for? And because he had his jeans on and dress socks. And he was like, well, I don't have any clean socks. Because he didn't want to say to me, like, you've been doing your thing. We're out of, like, I'm the tank is low on necessities. And so I just looked at him and I went, honey, celebrities don't do laundry.
I love it.
And he laughed at me. And so for like 2 days after that, there's that thing from the magazine, Stars, They're Just Like Us. I would like, I'd be doing the dishes. I'd be like, honey, stars, they're just like us. And he was like, but it was just this kind of, it was a way for me, because I totally identify with what you're saying. It was a way for me to enjoy it, but also recognize that the busyness was things that had to get done, but they didn't have to be done at the same time. It was just a fun way to kind of be like, stars, they're just like us. They do the dishes too.
Well, and I think when we voice that, okay, it allows us also, and I don't know how it is between you and your partner, but it gives us that opportunity to say, you can do it. And my youngest still lives at home. He's saving up money to get out on his own after the pandemic. But his laundry basket doesn't sit in his room, it sits in the laundry room. And so I tend to see it overflowing with clothes. He works 7 days a week. So I do understand he's busy. And when he sees it there, it's overwhelming to him. So he just puts on those blinders. And so for a long time, as I was doing his laundry, I was also complaining. Your laundry was overflowing, so I had to do it. He looked at me and he said, would it hurt me to be without shirts or the right pants or the right socks?
Yeah.
To realize that, hey, I have to do my laundry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was like, yeah, you're right. He said, so do not complain anymore.
Just leave it. Leave it, Mom. I'll do it.
And that's what he said. And it was like, yeah, but I don't like it overflowing. And he goes, that's your problem, not mine.
He just goes and buys a bigger basket.
Exactly. So again, another lesson that I learned was I don't have to be busy all the time.
Yeah.
And there are ways to get other people to take care of their chores.
Yep.
And but as women, we just see the need to get it done.
We keep our laundry at the top of the stairs. And sometimes I'll just stand there and say, I'll be like, can you, take the mug downstairs or something? Because Sam works upstairs on the weekends. And he'll just walk past and I'll give him like 3 things to carry up and downstairs. And he walks past the laundry every time. And I go, it's fascinating to me. He'll be like, what? And I said, it's like you don't see it. And I was like, but as a woman, I'm going down the stairs and I'm like, oh no, I've put that mug on the windowsill because that needs to go down. Oh, and then my makeup brushes, so I put those in the mug and then I pick up the stuff and I take it. But also, he'll go up and downstairs 3 times and walk past and I'm just like, wow, it's like it's not even there. I would love that.
Well, you and I and many of our listeners have to learn to become more like that.
Just leave it there. Have you seen that it was a viral video trend for a while of wives basically leaving like a piece of paper, but crumpling like a $20 bill in it and just leaving it somewhere that their partners or husbands would walk past. And then just, every few days they'd be like, day 1, day 3, day 12. And it would still just be on the floor. And the point of it was that like when you opened it, there was $20 inside. So it was a good,
yeah.
It was sort of like a social experiment of how long will I leave this here before it's sort of like, you just really don't see it.
Well, or when they finally see it, hopefully they don't throw it away. Because that's exactly what would happen here. It'd be sitting there for so long and eventually they would spot it and they would just toss it. And so it's interesting. My husband is much better about sharing in those things. And I understand why my son doesn't. Okay. He's busy doing his thing. And as he has said, I've lived in your home for 30 years and you've always been the one to do these things. He said, but if you bring it to my attention and you just don't do it, it'll get done. Yeah. And so I try to experiment with that, but there are days like today, it is overflowing and I probably will end up throwing it in the washing machine just so that I don't have to have him say, he's out of socks. So,
oh God, the number of times when we lived in the States, we had a car there. The number of times where Sam would come home with new socks. And I was just like, why? Why do we have 12,000 pairs of white socks? And he was just always like, they're $6.99 at Target. I'm like, okay.
Well, socks are his thing.
There you go.
For my husband, it's toilet paper. And yes, we have been hoarding way before the pandemic. So
you're actually the second couple I know who does that. One person I know, their partner buys it online in bulk. And they get like enough in January, they buy enough for the year. And basically Irish houses are very small. So it would be quite an amount to find places to store. And she showed me once we were on Zoom. She was like, it goes in this cabinet and then there's some in this cabinet.
Well, luckily I have room in my laundry room on top of my shelving where it's all stocked.
Yeah.
And when I go to the grocery store, like I will later today, I'll pick up another one, but that will go underneath the sink. So the ones that are up top, they're just going to sit there until all of a sudden it's emergency.
They're the apocalypse supply.
But that's always been his thing. When I first met him, we'd go to the grocery store and he'd say, we're going to get, 2 big packs. And well, why? There's just the 2 of us. And no. So every week he was stocking up and was like, we never had to worry. So
it's it's so interesting kind of what love language is and stuff like that. In his mind, that's caring and that's providing and having that comfort item sorted.
Exactly. You got it. Well, it's been fun having you on.
Oh, it's always such a treat, Karen. Thank you for getting in touch. And it's just, I feel so rejuvenated on a Friday afternoon. I appreciate it.
Well, I love it. Good luck with this online sale. Can you tell us where it is in case any of us want to go buy jewelry?
Sure. So it's just myirishjeweler.com. And yeah, so we're on Instagram, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. And if anyone wants to know more about love letters, I am at Flea Market Love Letters. And the website is just the same, fleamarketloveletters.com. And I was thinking there that I wanted to say this before we left. If any of the sort of talk about Jewish Irish culture or Jewish culture and love letter culture seemed interesting, there's a really great book by a veteran called Dear Selma, which is a published collection of his own letters. He's a Jewish GI who was involved in liberating some of the camps. And he was writing to his girlfriend at the time, Selma. So he came home and they ended up marrying, and he has published his collection of love letters from World War II for the Ronald McDonald House. So wonderful. Dear Selma is a great way for, if you want to get involved or if you want to read real love letters, Dear Selma is a great collection and a great cause.
Well, thank you for all that. We will put all of this in the show notes.
Cool.
And let's do this again soon, okay?
Oh, it'll be wonderful. Hopefully I'll be able to have, bought a shower curtain by then. I'll have more updates.
I hope so. Your mother could ship one to you.
Oh, there's a whole thing there as well. It's just so gratifying. You want to get it in person.
Got it. Okay.
All right, bye again.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.